I remember getting this magazine out of the mailbox when I was 12. I saw the cover, my eyes lit up, and then I hastily retreated to my bedroom to dig in. Being, by that point, a lifelong owner and enjoyer of Nintendo consoles, I had already chosen a side before I even realized it. As we peruse this nostalgic edition of GamePro magazine, I'll be covering the things that really stuck out as a kid, or that later became notable to me. I'm sure there's more in this issue that others would like to see, so I recommend going to the Internet Archive to look at the full magazine before it's too late. While you're there, maybe give them a donation or two if you're in a good spot financially. I'll link the magazine below, but otherwise, enjoy my selections from this 20-year-old magazine. In the direct center of the cover, we see the ever-majestic Master Chief, pointing an SMG at the viewer. Directly behind him and to the left, we see the iconic various suit-clad Samus Aran looking in the same direction. Behind and to the right of Master Chief, we see a random Hellgas soldier from the Killzone franchise in a near-identical pose to Samus. Around the edge, you'll find articles for GTA San Andreas, Burnout 3, Need for Speed Underground 2, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red, Call of Duty Finest Hour, and more. There's some serious heavy hitters here, many of which hold spots in several greatest games of all time lists. At the time, however, I could never have guessed how prolific all of these games would later turn out to be. Upon opening the cover, you're greeted with a full spread Halo 2 ad. Any hopes I had of an objective comparison of these games was quickly dashed. Let's start a tally for how many times each of these games shows up. It's just a standard table of contents. Nothing particularly notable except the Venusaur in the Pokemon picture is named Atomic Dog. More table of contents. Note the additional Halo 2 representation at the bottom, so another tally for Halo. I used to love reading these letters, but some of these are just hilarious in retrospect. Hoping for Halo on PS2? We're 5 years in on the PS5, and it hasn't happened yet, though there is reason to believe it's more likely now than ever before. Some more fan mail and questions. I want to bring your attention to the bottom here, though. Does anybody remember this Katana Soul controller thing? I never had one, but I distinctly remember seeing it on some review show on G4. Even at that point, I thought it looked gimmicky at best to downright useless at worst. Now I'm just wondering if there's ever been a challenge run done with it. This is a candid shot into how bugs and glitches used to be handled. The community, through various means, would create workarounds and methods to avoid these, as updates to address them were still relegated to MMOs and online games at the time. Newer releases often remedied these issues, but for those who bought the launch versions, there was rarely anything you could do to fix it outright, so you collaborated with other players to determine a workaround. These were the days when Nintendo still showed up to E3, before they started announcing new products via Nintendo Direct. During this time, leaks were no more reliable than your brother's friend talking about things they saw online, and when one did show up to E3 the next year, it became the new subject to discuss with your friends. The games here, especially, led to some wild speculation amongst my friend group. Here we see some reveals of game mechanics to be included in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The main thing of note here is that even at this point, people still intently watched what Rockstar was cooking. This was one of those pages I would have skipped past as a kid, not caring too much about sales figures. It is interesting to see games split up by platform, though, as nowadays it's usually lumped together into total sales. Splitting sales numbers like this was either a result of, or had some hand in, the jingoism inherent in the early console wars. You can see a defined split where these multi-platform games sold better, favoring PlayStation every time. Another Halo ad, except this time it's Mountain Dew flavored. Add another tally for Master Chief. Also, why is that dude holding two of them? 10 years ago. More like 30 years, am I right? Oh. How did I not know about the X-Band network adapter? It says it enabled the Genesis to connect online over phone lines to play against each other. I thought the furthest extent of madness that Sega implemented on the Sega Genesis was Sega Channel. That one, however, is for another video. City of Heroes was one of those games I really wanted to play, but didn't have the ability to. PC hardware-wise, or parents willing to enter credit card info into websites they'd never heard of wise. Cool clock, but it just goes to show the absurd convolution of Final Fantasy XI. Not much to say about the Matrix Online, as it just never really interested me. Just a little nostalgia hit from a time when arcades were still a place kids went. Some of these games look absolutely terrible, though. This op-ed is surprisingly relevant in the industry today, as we wade ever deeper into remasters and formulaic yearly releases. This may be specifically about first-person shooters, but I feel that it fits the wider industry as a whole nowadays. Oh, hi again, Halo. Let's get you another tally. Was anyone ever fond of these plug-and-play type games? I never once bought one, knew anyone with one, or ever played one, but there always seemed like there were new versions, so there had to be a market somewhere. Finally, we see Samus again, and out front where she belongs, no less. Who are those guys to the left? Oh, the, at this point, nameless protagonist and another generic rank-and-file enemy from Killzone. Alright, let's dive into this FPS war. I'll admit, this game was an absolute masterpiece, and my original opinion of this competition aged like milk. In my defense, though, Metroid Prime 2 was also a genuinely great game. Halo 2 introduced dual wielding, new vehicles, new maps, new game modes, one of the best campaigns available in a shooter, and one of my favorite soundtracks in a game to this day. I sunk hours into this game as a kid at a family member's house, and some of the best memories I have with a group of friends from that time is on this game. I can't, in retrospect, say the winner of this competition was anything other than Halo 2. It's as close to objective fact as art comparisons come. But boy, did I try my best to be Metroid Prime 2's strongest warrior. I went through some pretty silly mental gymnastics to put this game on a pedestal. Mind you, this game hadn't even released yet, and all I really had to go on was the E3 footage and a few articles like this. I distinctly remember playing this game and feeling relief at the fact that it was worth the weight and hype I had put behind it. Boy, was the multiplayer disappointing as a competitor to Halo, though. The story was excellent and a suitable follow-up to the original. I liked the Luminoth a lot and remember quickly becoming engrossed in their plight. The planet was vibrant and had beautiful weather effects and visor conditions like fog and rain. The bosses were creative and fitting of the environments you find them in. The power-ups and new beams felt unique, despite my criticisms of the ammo system. This article touches on a few things that I hadn't remembered before rereading this, like the control scheme taking some getting used to, and the similarities to Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess's Light and Dark worlds. Still, it was an excellent game. Killzone is the last party in the war, and seemingly the least represented here, as there's only one page dedicated to it. They don't have anything bad to say about it at least, but it was obvious to me even as a kid that the people making this magazine weren't representing the parties equally. This one is my least played of the three, likely due to not having access to a PS2 until much after this was released. I do remember enjoying what I did play of the campaign, though. Surprise, surprise! Not like anyone could have seen this coming. Some of these categories feel contrived, as if they inserted some simply to give wins to Killzone, while not ceding ground on the areas that mattered to most gamers at the time. With the limited information they had on these games at the time, however, I think the GamePro team did a decent job representing the strengths and weaknesses that these games wound up having upon release. That didn't stop Kid Me from wildly speculating about the Halo ad placements and the seeming favoritism on display in this competition. Dark and shady conspiracy theories crept into my mind as I kept trying to find faults in their relatively sound arguments. This is an article I had forgotten about, but of course Samus would win. Regardless of which game series you find more fun, Samus has far greater technology at her disposal, and experience on how to use it. My buddy's dad used to play all of the newest military shooters when they released, and so when this one released, I actually remember being able to talk with him about it while I was over. It's funny to think about, but I was always a Medal of Honor fan, so I never personally played this one, and was kind of bummed when Call of Duty won the Historical Military Shooters war. As I was never much of a horror fan, the only game I remember playing on this was Resident Evil 4, and it was great. Either way, The rating system is silly and shows its age through the references it uses. As far as I'm concerned, early 2000s and late 90s blends as one as far as pop culture references go. I am familiar with some of the games on the second page, but once again, never actually played any of them. I've seen this guide countless times, but still never cared to play Silent Hill 4. Maybe someday I'll pick it up, and it'll all come flooding back to me to help me in my time of need. Widely considered one of the best racing games of all time, Need for Speed Underground 2 had an excellent soundtrack and story mode. I'm normally not big on racing, and even I did a playthrough of this one. Tony Hawk's Underground 2 is in contention with the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game for the best Tony Hawk game ever. Until going back through this magazine, I hadn't realized just how many great and impactful games were coming out at and around this time. I never really played these games, but I understand the significance they had in the 3D platforming space. Really though, the only reason I'm even showing this is because I know someone, somewhere, didn't catch the pun in the title. I played quite a bit of MechAssault as a kid, and remember loving this game for the small little exosuits your character wore to change and hijack mechs. Never played Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, but I do remember friends arguing over which was better between that and Need for Speed Underground 2. I always did want to play Taiko Drum Master, but never had access to the peripheral or even the game. I rented the first Beautiful Joe, but didn't really like it, and remember almost renting the second one, but ultimately deciding on something else. Let's just forget about the second one. I've never actually seen one of these hard drives for the PS2 in person before. Always wanted to play this, but never could. Burnout 3 was an incredible game. Yet another game, released at this time, widely considered the pinnacle of the genre. Prior to Burnout Paradise, this was the definitive way to play Burnout. I played Star Wars Battlefront over a weekend with a friend of mine way back in the day, and had a great time on the multiplayer with him. Also, this ad is killing me. It's like crystallized amber, but instead of ancient insects, it's the general financial mindset that led to the dot-com bubble bursting. I've never played this specific Armored Core, though I am a big fan of the series as a whole. Donkey Konga, yet another rhythm game requiring a giant plastic peripheral that I craved, yet could never acquire on my own. I was never a fan of wrestling or the games. To each their own, though. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, they're just not for me. Juiced was a fun game that a friend of mine and I binged for an entire spring break a year or two after it released. Also, what's the deal with the skewed scores between consoles? While I don't have any time playing this, I do remember seeing it played a lot on a show at the time, called Arena on G4 TV.
2 teams enter.
1 team leaves.
It's time to find out who rules the virtual ring on another episode of
Arena.
Just an ad, but as a kid I rented this and completely beat it in the week I was allotted by the rental. It was an accomplishment that only I understood, as nobody else I've talked to has ever even heard of this game, let alone beaten it. Doom 3 was another one that I've only ever played at someone else's house, but always enjoyed what I did play, and heard good things about the rest. Also, some Half-Life references, and hopes for Half-Life 2. They have no idea what's about to hit them. In the running for Best Pokemon Remake, this game was absolutely earth-shattering for my little kid brain upon release, even coming with a free wireless link device. Not only did they have every Pokemon up to that point, but they'd, essentially, added an entire separate game's worth of post-game content, while simultaneously being one of the only Pokemon games to ever make full use of the level 1 to 100 progression. Truly, one of the best showings Pokemon has ever had, and the writer of this article seems to understand as well. Not to be outdone with previews of the now prolific, best-selling handheld device ever, Nintendo DS, this edition also includes details of the PSP2, a generation-defining device in its own right. Also on the page, a weird gimmick game, Boktai 2 Solar Boy Django, notable for the cartridge including a solar panel. I remember having fun with this one, but only years after it was released. It played a lot like a JRPG set in the Lord of the Rings universe. Interesting concept, but wasn't executed the best in my opinion. Champions Return to Arms was a seriously fun party game to play if you had a PS2 multitap at least. I did several playthroughs over the course of my time on the game, and most of them were with friends. It Unfortunately, wasn't a financial success, not enough to spawn sequels at least, but anyone who remembers playing it likely had a great time with it. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is one that I just never got into. I'm aware that it's widely considered the best Paper Mario game, but the series as a whole just never reached out and grabbed me. I had forgotten that Fable also came out around this time. One of the best experiences available for the original Xbox, and arguably the best non-Halo reason to own one. This game opened the eyes of many players at the time to just how robust choice systems could be, and to really drive home the freedom they built into their world. I'm baffled as to how they reviewed this as anything other than a 5. And finally, the ancient texts. The pages that I would frequently cut out of these magazines in an attempt to collate an archive of codes. These were an absolute godsend to have, especially when you found codes that you didn't know about or that weren't available on forums. Ultimately, though, I realized the futility of stockpiling these, as the codes would inevitably wind their way up online in a much more accessible medium than what I had. It's often entertaining to look back on important moments and various pieces of media from childhood, and remember your life at that point in time. It helps to keep your thoughts in line with the reality of the past, and sometimes you'll catch things within that media that you'd missed the first time around. All in all, I enjoyed my trip down Nostalgia Drive, and hope I kicked up some good memories for you too on the way.